Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back to an episode of Cheap Shots, and on today's episode, we're going to show you guys how to prepare for Warhammer the Old World in the most cheapest way possible. So, with the latest news coming out from Warhammer Fest 2023, we do know that Games Workshop now is fully planning on fleshing out and actually supporting Warhammer the Old World. The only question then becomes, how do you prepare for a gaming system that hasn't been released yet, and what can you do now in order to prepare for when it does release for you to be able to fully play? So you want to play Warhammer the Old World? Well, that is excellent, because I'm going to show you guys how to prepare for this gaming system as cheap as possible. So let's go and talk about how to get ready for the Old World. So just to give you a little bit of context about what Warhammer the Old World is, it is a rank and file style of fantasy tabletop wargaming. So instead of actually having your formations of soldiers and very loose kind of skirmish formations like in games of Warhammer 40,000 or games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, you actually have tight units that uses soldiers organized in ranks and files in order to fight in formations against your enemies. Now the reason why we're talking about this game is because, oddly enough, Warhammer the Old World and its setting was the actual original product that Games Workshop sold for themselves. They was actually a game that was a flagship title of theirs all the way from 1983 to 2015. Now what happened in 2015 is that Games Workshop decided not to pursue and to support Warhammer Fantasy along. They actually killed that product line and instead replaced it with Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And of course, Warhammer Age of Sigmar has been the primary fantasy wargaming that they've been using for their tabletop war games ever since. However, when this game of course happened, a lot of hardcore fans of the setting of Warhammer the Old World and this Old World setting for the last 30 years felt really abandoned when Games Workshop did this. So because of that, there was a huge aftermath that took place when they decided to end Warhammer and Warhammer Fantasy and instead pursue Warhammer Age of Sigmar. So shortly after Warhammer Age of Sigmar was released and Warhammer Fantasy was killed, a couple of other games and developers stepped in to fill in that gap that a lot of players had for that gaming system. We've had new systems coming in like the Ninth Age. Ninth Age is very much similar to what Warhammer Fantasy used to be like. At the same time, we also have Kings of War, made by Mantic Games. That's another rank and file style wargaming that also set in a fantasy setting. We have now the modern rules now for one-page rules is a really big one as well as the unofficial Ninth Edition Warhammer Fantasy made by the Warhammer's Army project by Matthias Eliasson. And of course you had other people like yours truly who just kept on playing Warhammer Fantasy 8th Edition regardless. And the reason why is because I fell in love with that gaming system, and even though the Games Workshop's killed it and doesn't support it anymore, nothing's stopping me from playing with my friends, so I am going to do it anyways. And the good news for me, because it looks like that Games Workshop is bringing back Warhammer Fantasy, so because of that I'm kind of like a little bit of a leg up on most people and getting ready for it. However though, there's a lot of new players out there who are very interested in playing this gaming system. So for those people, that's what this video is designed for. I'm going to help you to figure out what you need to do in order to prepare for Warhammer the Old World, so that way you could also participate in this awesome gaming system. So the very first thing I would ask you as a player is, how prepared are you already with the materials that you have on hand in order to play Warhammer Fantasy? And I'm going to break into what I like to call 3 levels of prep levels, we like to call it. So for example, do you currently right now play Warhammer Fantasy already? Granted, the game was killed back in 2015, but a lot of people have been playing Warhammer Fantasy in different versions of it. Some people have been playing 6th edition, some people have been playing 7th edition, some people, like yours truly, was playing 8th edition still. We even have people who are playing Oldhammer in like 3rd and 4th edition all the way back from the mid-90s. So if you're one of those kind of players who are already currently playing Warhammer Fantasy right now, even though the game was killed off, I would consider you what I like to call prep level 1, which means that you're ready to go right now. Now for a lot of players, I imagine you'd be what I like to call prep level 2, which means that you play some other form of game that is similar to Warhammer Fantasy. So either you play the Ninth Age, for example, Kings of War, or maybe play even Warhammer Age of Sigmar, in which case you already have a lot of miniatures already. Now the gaming system might be different than the one you're currently playing right now, and that's perfectly fine. I would consider you prep level 2 because you already have an army of some sort, and through some creative proxying and also doing some little minor things, you could pretty much get into Warhammer the Old World pretty easily for the most part. Now, if you are starting completely from scratch, meaning that you have never played Warhammer Fantasy of any type or any wargaming like that, I would consider you a prep level 3 person. And so, but depending on your situation, and that's where you're going to start off, this is how this video is going to break down for you. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about exactly what you need to do in order to prepare yourself and how to go about getting into the game. And depending on what tier you're at, we'll talk about exactly how you can prepare for the game. Alright, so one of the biggest ones, of course, is choosing an army for yourself. And in my opinion, it pretty much comes down to two main factors for a lot of players when they're choosing an army. Usually it's between one of two things. Either it's one, the aesthetic of that army, which means that you like the way it looks or the way that it plays, or you just like the way the miniatures look when you paint them up, or whatever the case may be. You're just attracted to this army for whatever X, Y, and Z reasons. And then the other type of player would be the one who's actually looking at the actual monetary cost of actually buying the miniatures and the rules in order to play that army. Now, in my opinion, when it comes to this, if you can, for the aesthetic person, I always say go with the aesthetic first. And the reason why is because the rule of cool always wins in default, because game rules change, additions change, heck, even some gaming systems get killed off. But if you like a miniature army based on the aesthetic of it and the lore of it, or whatever the reasons that attract you in the first place, more often than not, you're going to probably be okay with it to use the same army no matter what kind of situation happens between different editions or different game systems. So I always say go with that aspect of it, because you're going to be putting a lot of time and effort and money into it, so that's one way as well. Another way you could also look at it is the monetary value of the army as well. It's also another key factor, because let's face it, we all have different levels of income, and not everyone could just go out and just buy a brand new army right off the bat. So if money is a factor for you in this situation, there is nothing wrong with going with a army based on its cost. For example, there are some armies which are considered elite armies in the sense that their miniatures and the rules associated with those miniatures are much more powerful than other armies, in which case you might not need to purchase as many miniatures in order to field that army, and there is nothing wrong with that. A perfect example of this is Warriors of Chaos. The Warriors of Chaos faction in all the editions of Warhammer Fantasy have always pretty much had the same kind of factor involved. Their fighters or their miniatures are usually very powerful in terms of the tabletop, and their armies have traditionally been smaller than most other armies that you need to do. So because of that, they're kind of popular because you don't need to spend as much money to field a full-fledged army from that faction for that reason. So if you're doing it purely for monetary costs, nothing wrong with that at all. So depending on how you want to do it, whether you're attracted to the aesthetic or the cost or a combination thereof, that's pretty much how you're going to go about choosing an army to play for Warhammer the Old World. Though in this slide, we're going to talk about how you go about building your army for Warhammer the Old World. Now, we're not exactly sure what Games Workshop is going to do with the final product of Warhammer the Old World. There's just no way for us to know, because most of us don't work for Games Workshop, or we don't have access to that information of some sort. But we can make some pretty educated guesses of what to expect from Games Workshop. Traditionally in Warhammer Fantasy, your army is based on what is called a point value system, which basically means that every single miniature in your army is worth a certain number of points. And when you play a game of Warhammer Fantasy, you and your opponent agree on a point level for you to play against one another. Traditionally speaking, these points are anywhere between 1,000 to 3,000 points, or higher in some situations, and based on the level that you want to play at, that's how large your army is going to be. Your armies are created by assembling miniatures worth different point values for different regiments and different characters and etc. And at the same time, the type of miniatures you can take in your army and how many of those miniatures you can take is based on what's called army composition rules. Army composition rules basically categorizes different miniatures in your armies into different categories, and typically speaking, what ends up happening for Warhammer Fantasy is that a certain percentage point of your army's overall point value can be used for those different categories. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide when we talk a little bit more in detail about army composition. So when it comes to army composition rules, this is a critical factor in your army's creation. Now, like I said before, we don't know exactly how Games Workshop is going to use army composition rules, but typically from everywhere from 3rd all the way up to 8th edition, we saw some variation of this of these rules being used. So we're going to go on the assumption that they're going to try to do something kind of similar to this. Typically, you have units which are called characters, core, special, and rare in most cases. Now, these names for these units have changed throughout the different editions of Warhammer Fantasy, but in Warhammer Fantasy 8th edition, which was the very last version of this game, this is how you broke down your armies. So for example, 50% of the points of your army could be spent on characters. So these are things like your general, your wizard, special characters, which are dramatic characters from the lore of the game that you can include in your army. For example, these would be your character models, and typically you can spend anywhere between 25 to 50% of your points on those characters. Then you have what's called the core requirement, which is basically the meat and potatoes of your army, which is basically the very standard of your army. About 25% of your army minimum must be spent on core units. Up to 50% of your army can be spent up to what's known as a special unit of some sort, which are more elite units for your army, for example. And then finally you have rare units, which could be about 25% of your point composition can be used for that. These are things like war machines, typically very large monsters, or very extremely esoteric units that are associated with your faction. And that's pretty much how they do it. And like I said before, we're not really sure if they're going to use the same kind of system on this, but it's safe to bet that they'll see some version of this in the Warhammer the Old World, so this is a good starting point for you to do. So when you're going about buying miniatures for your army and assembling your army, keep these army composition rules in your mind, as well as the point values in order to build up your armies. So now that we're done talking about how to build an army and the army composition rules, let's talk about what level of preparedness you're at and what you'll need to do in order to prepare for Warhammer the Old World. So let's talk about the first tier of preparedness. I call this the prep level 1 level. Basically what that means is that you are already currently playing Warhammer Fantasy or some version of it, regardless of what edition it is. Now for those players like myself, for example, on this channel and various other YouTube channels, for example, for those people who are in the prep level 1, you're ready to go right off the bat. You pretty much have a miniature army of some sort already to go. You've gotten some practice with using this army over time. You've played maybe one or several editions of the game. All you got to wait for now is for the rules, the official rules to drop, and you're ready to go on that one. Now I know there's been a huge concern on the chatter on the internet about base sizes, which is actually the square bases that your miniatures stand on. Typically speaking, in the older editions of Warhammer Fantasy, your miniatures stood on anywhere between 20 to 25 millimeter square bases, and it looks like that they're changing up these base sizes, and a lot of people are actually kind of concerned about them. Now in my opinion, ignore them. Don't worry about the size of the bases of your miniatures, even if you're using the old school style of bases for your miniatures. And the reason why I say ignore them is because unless you're a very competitive player who plays in like the tournament scenes, having base size is not going to even be an issue. All right, so don't even worry about that as well. Now if you do run into an opponent who is kind of, I don't know, a stickler for the base sizes, all you need to do in order to fix that problem is use movement trays to deal with the base sizes. So for example, if you have a unit of 20 miniatures who are all mounted on 20 millimeter bases, and suddenly those miniatures need to be put on 25 millimeter bases, which is 5 millimeters more because of the new edition rules, just take a movement tray that would reflect that size, put your original miniatures on it, and just say, hey look, this is what the size would actually be, and its imprint would be on the tabletop, and you can just do it that way. Because let's face it, no one wants to spend money on bases when they can use that money for miniatures instead. So it's not even a huge issue at that point. So because of that, if you're the prep level 1, good news for you, just use that movement base as a fix for the base size issue and just start playing, so you're ready to go from there. Now, for a lot of players out there, I would assume that a majority of players are what I like to call the prep level 2 level of play, which means that you're playing a miniatures game of some sort. It may not be Warhammer Fantasy, it may be Warhammer Age of Sigmar or Kings of War or whatever the situation may be. Now, even though you might not be as 100% ready to go like the prep level 1 guys, you're still better off than starting from scratch. So this is what I recommend you for do. So if you have never played Warhammer Fantasy before, I suggest that you research. There are a lot of websites out there, a lot of online communities, and there's lots of videos like this one you're currently watching now on YouTube that are on the subject of Warhammer Fantasy and possibly Warhammer the Old World. So go ahead and watch those videos, learn that information on the internet, look for those communities, get involved in that information, so that way you could use that to help you figure out what you want to do when you actually get into Warhammer the Old World. Like I said before, another really wonderful project to use was Warhammer the Armies project, which is an excellent resource. We're going to talk about that resource later on here in the video, but that'll be a perfect resource for you to check out because 9th edition rules, which are unofficial for Warhammer Fantasy, were created by the Warhammer Armies project by Matthias Eliasson. He's got a whole set of rules for 9th edition Warhammer, as well as all the army books for the different factions as well. So, and even though we don't know exactly what Games Workshop is going to do with their rule setting, it's safe to assume that they're going to do some semblance of what they've done in the past, so that way they can bring in a lot of their old players into the game. They might change some individual minutiae and nuances of the game, but overall it's safe to bet that things like movement, combat, and shooting and etc. will be pretty much the same as they always been in the different levels and the different versions of Warhammer Fantasy. Another thing that level 2 players can also do is also proxy the miniatures to similar ones in Warhammer Fantasy. Okay, so let's say for example you're playing Kings of War. Now, let's say you're playing the what I believe it's called the Undead faction in Kings of War. The ghouls that you have for Kings of War would be exactly the same thing as their fantasy counterparts in Warhammer the Old World. There would be ghouls, for example. Or if you have miniatures that are way off base from what they think would look like from Warhammer Fantasy, you can still proxy them for the most part. Now, I know some people are get kind of emotional and stickler on proxying miniatures, but let's face it, miniatures are expensive, and unless your opponent, unless you're playing in an officially sanctioned tournament, no one's really going to give you a hard time for proxying miniatures for the most part, so long as you keep it within the realm of reason. For example, let's say you have some kind of humanoid type miniature for whatever game you play, and you want to proxy them as, let's say, a Bretonnian man-at-arms. So long as it's on the same kind of scale as what a Bretonnian man-at-arms would be, most people are not going to give you much problems about that, because we're all in the same boat together when it comes to the cost of producing miniatures and stuff like that. So long as you're doing anything crazy like taking a goblin and saying it's a dragon, for example, no one's really going to begrudge you that one. So long as a miniature is within the realm of similarity of some sort between what it represents on the tabletop and what it represents in the game, most players are not going to have an issue with you proxying those miniatures. So that part's kind of nice as well. At the same time, let's say for example you play a game like Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and those miniatures are on round bases, but now you're looking at a game that uses square bases and regiments and stuff. That's where the movement tray comes in to deal with those different base sizes and even shapes of bases. For example, if a buddy of mine in my gaming group who plays Warhammer Age of Sigmar, he plays Beastmen, for example, and Beasts of Chaos. I'm sorry, that's what they're called now in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And all of his miniatures are mounted on the round bases. And he wants to play Warhammer the Old World when it comes out. And he's kind of worried about it because he's like, hey, look, man, these Age of Sigmar miniatures are on round bases, and the Warhammer the Old World are on square ones. What do I do? And that's what I told him. I said, we'll just make you a movement tray that represents the size of the unit that you want. Just put the miniatures of the round bases on that movement tray, and then bam, it's going to solve that problem, no problem whatsoever. And then of course, that's going to solve his issues so that he could play Warhammer Fantasy with us. So it's not even a big thing. And so because of that, just make those proxying if you need to. Get those movement trays in case your miniatures are on different size or shape bases, and then just get ready to play like always. Now, if you want to change those base sizes or whatever the case may be to do so, I mean, you can do so if you want to. It's completely your choice. But I just say just doing some proxying and some movement trays in order to solve that base issue, and you could be perfectly fine. Plus, not to mention, you can play multiple game systems, which is also kind of nice. Alright, so let's talk about players who are on the Prep Level 3 level. These are people who have actually no miniatures whatsoever, and they're basically starting from scratch, and they're really interested in playing the Warhammer the Old World, and they want to get into this. So this is what I would recommend for you. Some of the things I would recommend for you would be the same as the Level 2 people. So once again, doing that research, going on the different websites, going to different communities about this, looking at videos like this one, for example, about Warhammer Fantasy, and just do the web research that way to see what you might be interested in, get some familiarity with what the setting is like, what kind of miniatures you might be interested in playing, what faction you might be wanting to do as well. Once again, I also suggest checking out the Warhammer Armies project. It is an excellent resource for all things Warhammer, and even though we don't know exactly what Games Workshop is going to do in the end, it's still safe to say that a lot of the elements that from that website will probably be used in the miniature wargame that comes out as well. And then at the same time, if you actually want to try playing this game, I suggest using a game system that I like to call index card wargaming. You might be thinking, Commander Cheapskate, what the heck is index card wargaming? I'm going to talk about that here in the next slide here as well. And the reason why I recommend you use index card wargaming is because there's nothing worse than spending a lot of money on a game system that you're trying to play, and you end up playing it, and maybe you might hate it or dislike it, and then you're like, great, I'm now out $200, $300, $400 trying to play this game, and now suddenly I don't like it anymore. So what we're going to do on the next slide, I'm going to show you in the next video about what the Warhammer Armies project looks like, as well as what index card wargaming looks like as well. The index card wargaming looks really, really cheesy. I'm going to say that right off the bat now, but like I said, doing index cards in order to playing wargaming is a lot cheaper than actually buying miniatures that you will end up hating, so try that level as well. So we're going to take a real quick break, go to my desktop and talk about the Warhammer Armies project as well as index card gaming. Alright, so here we are on my desktop computer. As you can see, we have a wallpaper of the Warhammer the Old World settings so far that's been released by Warhammer's community website. So one of the resources I would think is an excellent resource regardless of what tier you're at, whether you're at Prep Level 2 or Prep Level 3. One of the resources I would highly recommend is that you check out this one, the Warhammer Armies project. This was created by a man named Elias Mathiasen, and he actually made a huge contribution to Warhammer Fantasy in my opinion. What this guy basically did is he created a free to download resource for 9th edition Warhammer Fantasy. Now granted, it's completely unofficial, but this is actually one of the coolest resources that came out during the time period after Warhammer Fantasy. 8th edition was basically done, and they basically stopped supporting Warhammer Fantasy and went on to Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And the reason why I would recommend this resource to you is because what he basically has created is a 9th edition series of rules, which is based on earlier editions of Warhammer Fantasy. So a lot of the core game mechanics that are available in Warhammer Fantasy, with ranks and files and flanking and maneuvering, movement, magic, combat, pretty much the core set of rules, which says for the most part remain consistent through all editions of Warhammer Fantasy, this 9th edition rulebook does have. So, and the best part is it's free to download because it's unofficial, and you can download those rules and learn about the rules and learn about the game. At the same time, he's also created army books for all the different factions of Warhammer Fantasy. So for example, the Forces of Order, these are the ones that are usually staples of Warhammer Fantasy, things like Dwarves, Empire, High Elves. Those are all pretty much just core part of the setting of the old world. So you could download rules for those. Wood Elves, for example, Bretonnian, so we know that Bretonnia is being supported in Warhammer the Old World. Same thing with the Force of Destruction, like with Orcs and Goblins. There's probably going to be core mechanic. Dark Elves might be there as well. Same thing with Undead, Skaven, Chaos being a huge portion of that. Even the non-aligned forces like the Tomb Kings, for example, which we know they're doing Tomb King support. You could download those. Now, granted, we're not exactly sure what Games Workshop's going to do for Warhammer the Old World, but we can make an educated guess that the rules for those armies will be pretty much similar. And the nice thing about the reason why I bring that up is because Elias Matthias has pretty much used core game mechanics that all these factions have used throughout the various editions of Warhammer. So that's the nice thing about that. So we can make that educated guess that they might be able to do the same thing. Now, of course, it could be completely left field and radically different when the final product comes out. But until then, the educated guess would assume that, of course, it's kind of like this. And like I said before, you can download these resources absolutely for free. So that way you can get familiar with the rule setting, get familiar with the lore, get familiar with the various factions that you might be interested in playing in Warhammer the Old World. And then, of course, the best of all, you could use those rules and start practicing for actually playing the miniature war game. And so this is a wonderful resource that's absolutely free to download. In fact, I suggest you go check it out just because it's amazing all the work that this individual has put into creating this and helping support for Warhammer Fantasy. So once again, a really great, important resource to check out, Warhammer Armies Project. As you can see up here on the website, it's www.warhammerarmiesproject.blogspot.com. Check it out, look at those resources, and then get wargaming. So next we're going to talk about what I like to call index card wargaming. Now you might be thinking, index card wargaming, what the heck are you talking about, Commander Cheapskate? Now this is for people who are on the tier 3 of level of preparedness, meaning that you're starting completely from scratch. And one of the big things about starting a war game from scratch that can be quite daunting is the price of entry in order to participate in the setting of the game. And of course, the last thing you want to do as a player is to spend absorbent amount of monies on a game that you're playing for miniatures for an army that, as you're playing the game, you might not even like. You might hate the way the game plays, or you might hate the way the army actually uses it, and so then it becomes a giant waste of money for you. So what I like to do is what's called index wargaming, and the reason why we call it that is because when I was a younger kid and we were getting to Warhammer Fantasy, all the way back in 3rd edition Warhammer Fantasy, I had a lot of friends who couldn't play and couldn't buy armies just because we were we were kids at the time. We didn't have a lot of money to throw around to buy miniatures and stuff like that. So the question becomes, how do you get to play the larger battles if you can't buy a full set of miniatures for your army? Well, this is where the index card comes in. This is what I'm going to show you here on this screen. So here I am, I have like a little presentation here made with some tables. Index card wargaming sounds exactly what the name suggests. You take index cards and you literally make units out of individual index cards. So for example, if you see over here, we would draw like a little box here with five rows across, and then of course we have our files where we have our ranks here. So this is like what, 4 ranks deep, 5 miniatures across, a typical unit of 20 skeletons, for example. You write this on your index card. I know it sounds super cheesy, and I know it sounds really, really cheap, but trust me, if you're starting from scratch, it's a great way to get experience with a war game. So what you do is do something like this. You draw a little grid like this, represent casualties on your index cards. You label exactly what the unit is. You put letters to represent different guys in your unit. For example, if you have like a Lich, for example, for Tomb Kings, you can say one of the boxes is your Lich, while another one is your Champion. For C, S is your Standard Bearer, M is your Musician, kind of like that, and you put down what the unit is. And then of course you have, like for Bretonnians, for example. This is like a knight unit in Lance formation with their general in the front, followed by a champion and a musician with their standard bearer and maybe a level 4 wizard in the back. And they have another unit of 9 knights here and another unit of 20 bowmen here. Now, the reason why you would do this is because you can't afford miniatures, right? So if you're just wanting to even know if you even like the rules for your army, do this if you have to. And that's exactly what I recommend, especially if you're a kid. Like, I know a lot of young people out there trying to get into the hobby as well. And this is nothing wrong with doing this because you don't have cash. You don't have a lot of access to money in most cases. So there's no shame in not having any money and wanting to play. I remember this one time I was playing at my local game store. I was playing a high school student. It was one of our tournaments. And he didn't have enough miniatures to play in that tournament. So I just told the guy, just get out some index cards and just put what the unit is with whatever magic items are on there, so that way you can play. Now, the TO, of course, was peeved about that, but I told the TO, I was like, why don't you just let the kid do it? He wants to play, let him do it. So that's how he did it. And that kid found out that he ended up liking the faction he was playing, so he bought more miniatures as time went on. Case solved. So as you can see right here, when you do index card war game, you literally do things like mover your knights to do into hand-to-hand combat with your skeletons. You roll the dice, for example, to figure out exactly what your casualties would be like. And then what you do, of course, you just exile your enemies as they get killed one by one, just kind of like that, just to represent the fact that you have people being killed. And that's pretty much how you do it. Now, I know it's super cheesy, and I know it's really real basic in order to do this, but if you don't have any money to do this, there's nothing wrong with doing it this way, because you're never going to know what you're going to what you might like or not like when you're purchasing an army. It's better, believe me, it's better to do this, building 1,000-point index card army and just skirmishing it out a couple of times with your friends. It's better to do it this way, spending maybe $350 on a stack of index card instead of actually spending $200, $300, $500 on an army that you may or may not even like by the time you actually start throwing dice on the tabletop. So this is a much more cost-effective way, and it's absolutely super cheap in order to do so. So when I talk about index card wargaming, this is what I'm referring to. So for example, let's pretend these skeletons use a spell on this unit of bowmen. You could just X these guys out. Oh my god, they take 5 damage. Take a panic test. You roll your dice, and oh my god, the unit fled and now it's destroyed. I mean, something like that. Something really, really simple, really, really basic, and you can play on a kitchen table if you have to, or on a coffee table, or even on the floor if you have to, and you could actually just do this and get this taken care of. Like I said before, it's super cheesy, but you never know unless you try it, and who knows, you may or may not like it. It just kind of depends on the situation for that. And let's say you're trying this out and you realize that the game rules you don't like, or maybe the game mechanics you don't like, or the faction you don't like. At worst, you're out a couple of hours of your time and maybe $3.50 for a stack of index cards. That's the worst it's going to cost you in case you don't like that army or you don't like that rule set. Better that than spending hundreds of dollars on something you don't like. So when it comes to index card wargaming, this is what I'm referring to. So if you decide to try this out and to see how it works out for you, maybe you might like it, maybe you might not. I know it just kind of depends on your personal preference. But if I was to invest a lot of money in something, this is what I would do in order to save that money. Alright, so now that we're done talking about the Warhammer Armies project as well as index card wargaming, I know it seems kind of silly, but trust me, it's a system that works. Let's go ahead and talk about how you can slowly build up your army. So for those of you who are starting from scratch, I suggest you start building an army around 500 to 1,000 points and start at that level first. And the reason why I recommend that is because at the 500 to 1,000 point level, you could actually start playing with your army and also play opponents with Warhammer Fantasy, and of course slowly build off from there. Buying things like secondhand miniatures and proxying will also be extremely invaluable for you as this time goes on. And so because of that, getting those proxies, using those secondhand miniatures, getting that 500 to 1,000 point army to play a couple things will really help you to learn the rules and grasp the gaming system, understand how your army operates, and at the same time help you to assemble your army slowly. Miniatures from Kings of War, Warlord Games, from some of their historical lines, Age of Sigmar, for example. This will really help you out in order to build that 500 to 1,000 point level army and just play a lot of games at that level for you to get comfortable with it and to try out the system, and then from there you can move on to the higher levels of the game. Now, once you start that 500 to 1,000 point level army and you got the miniatures that you need to go and you're comfortable with building and playing that game and using that army, I suggest that you slowly build up your army at 500 points at a time. So for example, if you start at the 500 point level, buy another 500 points worth of miniatures and assemble that way you can play at the 1,000 point level. If you're playing at the 1,000 point level, buy another 500 points of miniatures to make it to the 1,500 level and then play from there. And then from there, go to the 2,000 level. From 2,000 level, go to 2,500 level, 2,500 2,500 level to 3,000 level, or whatever level you want to stop or go to is entirely up to you. Typically speaking, most players are usually playing around the 2,000 to 2,500 level. That's usually considered a standard size army in miniature wargaming for Warhammer Fantasy. So if you want to stop at that level, nothing wrong with that. If you want to play less than that, there's nothing wrong with that either. If you want to play higher than that, like I do, there's nothing wrong with that either. Play at whatever level that is comfortable for you and at the level that you can afford to play. Because even though miniatures wargaming is fun, it doesn't make sense to go in debt and to lose things to engage in the hobby. So for example, if you're looking between paying rent or buying another unit for your army, always default on rent. Okay, so that's the reason why I would suggest that. So slowly building up your army over time will definitely help you out. Now, the most question that I often get from new gamers is, okay, where do I play this at now? If you're very, very lucky and you got a dedicated group of players and friends that you usually play with, then your problems are solved. You can just play at your home with your buddies and everything is fine that way. Local game stores are more than happy to host games as well. There's also a lot of cool players who play in those game stores as well, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some places have clubs, for example, at those game stores. Places like at universities and colleges usually have clubs as well. High schools and middle school clubs are also out there too, etc. So just find areas that you might be able to do so and play. And of course, going online and looking for those communities, great way to meet some really cool people who have a love of the game that you're playing, and you guys can share in that love and have a lot of fun playing that as well. Now, if you can't find anyone to play with, there is nothing wrong with solo gaming if necessary, okay? Solo wargaming is basically where you play against yourself in some situations. And so if that happens to you, there's nothing wrong with that either. For example, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit and we were all put down on lockdown, I did a lot of solo gaming with Kill Team, Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team, in order to make content for my channel. So there's nothing wrong with that either, okay? In fact, it could actually be considered more challenging because you know exactly what your opponent's going to do. So you got to try to counter that as well. So that's kind of something you might take into consideration as well. So if you're a level 3 preparation player, meaning that you're starting directly from scratch, these are the things I would recommend for you to do so, and it'll help you to do so cheaply. All right, so always keep that in mind. So for my closing thoughts on this one, for my conclusion, and this is probably the most important thing I could probably tell any brand new player getting into Warhammer the Old World: do not worry about FOMO. FOMO is an acronym for that represents fear of missing out. FOMO is quite a thing that's happening now a lot lately with a lot of consumers. A lot of people will do certain things because they're afraid they're going to miss out on something that's really awesome or really cool, and so because that they make kind of unwise decisions in some situation to do this. Firefest, for example, is a perfect example of how FOMO can go wrong. You know, all these people want to go to like a Cholo type situation for like a concert, and it ended up being like a huge disaster for those people, and the thing that motivated those people is fear of missing out something that was cool going on. So don't get FOMO for Warhammer, okay? That's something that you don't need to worry about. And the reason why I say that, not to be afraid of it, is because this game has 30 plus years of gaming history. A lot of people have played this game over those 30-year time span. A lot of people are currently still playing it. Some people have been playing it since day one. Some people are getting into it just now. It's not something that's going to go away for a while, okay? Because after all, even if the game line does get killed off, nothing is stopping you from just playing it on your own anyways. So get into it slowly, okay? Get to learn the rules, get to learn to use what units you want, slowly build up your army if you need to. There's nothing wrong with that as well, because unfortunately sometimes some of the marketing strategies that some of these companies like to use is to use FOMO in order to get sales taken care of. For example, switching with the base size on miniatures, that's a clear-cut fear of missing out marketing strategy for this product, in my opinion. You have all these guys who are really excited about playing this game, and they're using the old size base size, and they're like, oh my god, I gotta get the new size bases, and they're out there right now buying the new base sizes in order to do this. That's a FOMO tactic, so don't fall for that stuff, okay? So, you know, do whatever's the cheapest for you. And probably the most important thing I could probably tell you is check out all the free resources that are available to you as a player. All right, these, in my opinion, are the best resources available because they cost you nothing in order to learn about this stuff. So check out the websites, check out the forums, learn about the rule mechanics of your games. Check out YouTube. I mean, there's a lot of us here on YouTube that do Warhammer Fantasy, including my channel as well. There's some channels out there that do a lot more than I do, and they're really better at what I do as well. So check out those resources because they're free to use. I mean, I would have killed to have something like this available to me when I was first starting to get into this, because back when I was getting into it, you were completely in the dark, had no idea what to do. You were pretty much on your own. Now there's a lot of communities out there, a lot of resources out there for use, and a lot of them are free, which is the best thing ever. And that's how you can get to this game cheaply, is by using all those free resources and using those to help you out in the future. YouTube, for example, is excellent for this. So that's what I would suggest for you to do. So with that being said, my closing remark is, with Warhammer the Old World coming coming out. If there's a game system that you might be interested, good luck to you and keep gaming. Get into the system, get into the game, get into the community. There's a lot of cool people involved in the community doing some amazing things with Warhammer Fantasy, and enjoy yourself, because after all, at the end of the day, that's all it's about. It's about rolling some dice, playing some games, and having fun with your friends. And that's exactly what this whole system is designed to do. So if you're starting to think about getting into Warhammer the Old World, I hope this video has helped you out. If it has, please feel free to leave a comment down below. If you have questions about things, don't be afraid to put your comments on there. We all start off with something, not knowing things. I'm being more than happy to answer those questions for you guys. So remember to please like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is valuable to us as always. Check us on Facebook and Instagram for all the greatest hobby news related to this channel. I will see you guys on the next one. Be safe, be cool, be classy. Catch you guys next one.